curiosity is not a thing that we have to like teach. Curiosity is innate in us all that the system blocks out of us. Our role is to just like enable it.
Hello and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, I interview peak performing innovators in the creative, social impact, and earth conservation spaces who are working to change the world. This episode is brought to you by Brain FM, which combines the best of music and neuroscience to help you relax, focus, meditate, and even sleep. And if you're liking the show, I would love it if you'd buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/IsoldeT. See the show notes for details. And now, let's get on with the show. Hey there, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. Super honored that you're here. I'm also really honored to have my, parallel twin on the show today. Check this out. Dr. Kynan Robinson is an award-winning teacher, educational leader, and co-learning innovator. Founder of the... Let me just tell you, he and I are working along parallel lines, and I'm ridiculously excited. So you're going to hear me talk about this, and I'm going to get all flustered and flabbergasted. He's the founder of the... No, I'm serious. This is bad. Founder of the renowned Russ Consultancy with offices in the U.S., Australia, and clients on 6 continents. Robinson and his team are trusted partners of prestigious educational institutions, businesses, and government agencies who are ready to drive the change they want and need. A highly sought-after keynote speaker, Dr. Robinson, I'm going to call him Kynan, has had work published in over 60 academic and non-academic publications. Concurrent with his education career, Robinson is a cross-genre composer and musician, winning 3 ARIA Awards, 2 Australia Council grants, and a ton more. Kynan, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so I have many, many questions.
Yeah.
And I'm just gonna start with what got you here. What got you to the point where you went, you know what? I need to be working to help people connect through these kinds of creative endeavors.
What got me here?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So how many hours have we got for this podcast?
As long as you want. My record is 3.5 hours, just so you know.
Hey, okay, that's a really great question. And I guess it goes all the way back to my career started as initially as a musician and a composer, and then at some stage, I met my wife and we had our first child, and she said, "You really need to earn some money." And so then I,
oops,
yeah. And so then I moved into education as a lot of musicians do, and I actually really got in, I got really passionate about education. I actually loved it. I love the theory behind it, in terms of understanding how we best learn. And so I very quickly moved into sort of leadership roles within the school that I was in. And one of the things at the time, this is going back sort of 15, 20 years ago now, technology was really hitting education hard, in terms of everybody had to have electronic whiteboards and laptops and iPads started coming in. And part of my role was head of technology. So part of my role on the leadership team was head of technology. And instead of just going hard down the technology route and just flooding the school with technology, I decided to go the other way and sort of stop and go, what does technology enable that has never been enabled before? And if there is something there, so how is it changing the way we learn? If there is something there, we'll go down this route. Otherwise, we're just not going to do it. So, which is probably a pretty controversial thing for the head of tech in a school to say. Let's just not do it.
Right.
And so my head of school at the time, so I was 2 she was an incredibly supportive woman, and she gave me the time to actually do this. So essentially I took about a year to really start looking at what digital pedagogy actually was, what is it, and is it in any way different? And then when you start really looking at technology, what's the greatest technology that we have? It's language, right? Language is our greatest technology because it's allowing us to communicate. And so the language is essentially changing, and it was changing through because of the internet. So then I figured okay, so MacBooks aren't that interesting. iPads aren't that interesting. The iPhone's not that interesting. The internet actually is the most interesting of all technologies. And what is the internet? This is especially back in those days where it wasn't so controlled as it is now. The interesting thing about the internet was the was connectivity essentially, and
Mhm.
the amount of connectivity a student could have, and the ability to connect with different forms of connection
Mm.
was the thing that to me that was most fascinating. So therefore, that's when I started to really move into sort of like network learning theory. And then I moved into complexity theory, which is like a theory looking at like complex adaptive systems and what emerges from them when the right sort of systems are in place. So essentially, I was what I was doing was going, you know what? We have the ability, right? These kids, right, have the ability right now to connect to networks of knowledge, which all essentially exist on the internet, networks of knowledge, and not only to connect as in a like on the outskirts, like sitting way back here looking at them, but they could actively participate in them. And the more you actively participate in a network of knowledge, the more you get closer to the center of it. So there's a number of ways to actually start actively participating. And the closer you get to the center of this network of knowledge, you're actually participating in the creation of new knowledge. So then I started thinking, so our students could actually be creators of new knowledge rather than sort of passive receivers of outdated content. Wouldn't that be an exciting thing to do? So that's really when I started to move into like understanding how we could potentially change the way we do education to acknowledge that kind of learning, if that makes sense. So
Mhm.
given that, the irony of this is I started looking at out of school learning and in school learning, and out of school learning, they're already doing this. Like, they're already through whether they're already connecting to these sort of networks and this is going back, remember, 15 years ago. So imagine what they're doing now. But I had this great photo of my son, right, who at the time was about 8 years old. And I used to use this photo as a provocation when I would do keynotes. And he's sitting there on our lounge chair, and he's connected to the TV. There's a game on the TV, like an Xbox game, let's just say, or a
Mhm.
PlayStation game. He's also sitting there, and he's got two laptops next to him. One is a PC, one is a Mac, right? Then he's also on his phone, and then he's also got a pair of headphones on. So there's
Wow.
five different forms of connectivity, five obvious forms of connectivity. And I would say to the crowd, so what do you notice about this photo? Let's deconstruct this photo. And I would also say, by the way, when I took this photo, I was the head of tech, and and he was at the school that I was at, by the way, like teaching at. And I would go, this photo stressed me out. So I fully appreciate the whole, I'm stressed out about screen time kind of concept. This one really stressed me out. And
Mhm.
my wife actually said, why don't you just look at what he's doing? And so that's when even though I talked it still raised some anxiety in me. And so then I deconstructed it for myself, and then I'd get the crowd to deconstruct it. And I'd say, what do you think they're doing? The first thing they would always say is, oh, he's multitasking, which is not really that interesting, right? And I go, yeah, okay, he's multitasking, sort of. What else? And they go, oh, he's on both a PC and a Mac. And so, yeah, okay, that's not that interesting either, but yep, great. But what else? And they could never get it. And I'd go, what he's actually doing is he is looking for a conversation, and he's connecting to at least 5 or 6 different networks at the same time.
Mhm.
And then if you actually notice, so on his MacBook, right, he might have a Google Doc open, and he might be creating a story on his, they're all going to different places. And if you actually start looking, the information or the connectivity that he's getting from each different network is starting to cross. So the characters in the game are starting to come into his story. Like, it's all started to hybrid, and it's all starting to emerge. And that's when I started to go, wow, this is actually really fascinating. So he's actually, like, instead of just sitting there wasting his time on screen, screen time or whatever parents would be screaming about, he's actually doing something very, very interesting. Now, that's his out of school learning, like how he learns out of school. And then we stick him in school, and we take all of that away from him, and we go, let's teach him about historical famous dates, or classic whatever we do in school nonsense. And that's when I start to go, oh my goodness, there's actually something here which is really fascinating in terms of how he's learning. That's kind of how it started for me. Where it goes into creativity is then when you push that, we then pushed that into in his school. So, and this is a long-winded answer, I'm sorry, but
No long-winded answers. This is terrific. Keep going.
yeah. So then I started going really pushing down this theory of like, okay, this is how learning actually happens. It learns through connection. So learning happens through connection. Creativity actually happens through connection. It's all about connection. It's all about connectivity. Learning, how we connect, how we learn, and how we change is all through connectivity. The more you increase the connectivity and the type of connectivity, the more it influences those other things. So one of the final things I did at that school, which then turned into my PhD dissertation, is I did a project which involved Minecraft, the game Minecraft. Mm-hmm. And by this stage, I was really interested in looking at complexity theory. And complexity theory is a theory that says, that looks at emergent phenomenon that arises from a complex adapting system. Okay, a complex adapting system. It looks for the emergent phenomenon that arises from it, like magic. So emergent phenomenon is this stuff that comes from the system that cannot be it could not be predicted by looking at any of the data in the individual agents that make up the system, right? Mm-hmm. And I went, well, a school is a complex adapting system. It is a complex system. What about if we applied some of the feature sets that allow for emergent phenomenon into a school? So why don't we look at a school and say what enables or what hinders connectivity, or what enables or what hinders sort of emergent phenomenon or creativity rising from a school, or what are the feature sets that do that? So one of the things when you look at emergent phenomenon is hierarchy. Like the more hierarchy you have, the less likelihood emergent phenomenon will arise. The next one is linearity. Like, so if something is very linear, it's going to hinder the chances of emergent phenomenon. There's other things like communication, internal and external communication sources, et cetera, et cetera. So what I did is I set up a project in the game Minecraft. So Minecraft is a open source game where there's really not any rules. Like, you can do whatever you like in there, right? So it was the most open world I could find, because I was trying to reduce hierarchy, right? And then we said to the kids, we had 140 kids, of which my son was one. We said, these are like 11 and 12-year-olds, and we said, okay, our world has blown up because of unsustainable practices. However, we have discovered another world which is remarkably similar to our world, and it's in the game Minecraft. So essentially, we're role playing now, right? We're all flying, and we all did this great simulation where we pretended to get into a rocket and fly to this other planet. We are all flying to this other planet, and we are going to build a new world. Or everything you build in this world will be based on your learnings about sustainability and biospheres, right? And then what I did was I tried to reduce the hierarchical controllers. So what are the hierarchical controllers in a school? A teacher and student. There's your first one, right? So get the teachers out of the way. What's the second one? The curriculum. Get the curriculum out of the way. Let's just get it all out of the way and see what happens. And so essentially I was looking, we created a complex adaptive system, which was these 146 kids in this game of Minecraft. Could they learn beyond what we could teach them, essentially? And could they create beyond what we could teach them? What was the emergent phenomenon that would arise? So over a period of 10 weeks, they all kind of existed in this world in Minecraft. And what came from it was truly, truly remarkable. So it almost moved into chaos and disaster, which is like when you're looking for like emergent phenomenon, which like your creativity, it's the complexity theory says you must be sitting on the edge of chaos, right? But not falling into it. If you fall into it, you fall into chaos and it's a disaster. But right. If you go too far the other way, you go into a thing called stasis, which is also a disaster. It's like that's where no creativity happens either. Mm-hmm. So you got to be sitting right on the edge. This one almost moved into complete chaos because the kids were not experienced at working in this environment, and so what they were doing was they were sort of like destroying each other's stuff in Minecraft. It was starting to become a complete disaster. But when they would come to the teachers and say, "Oh, this is a disaster. Like, can you help?" Our instruction was like, "No, you go figure it out," right? And so empowering them to do it again, And what they did is they started to apply. They actually built and applied a very like complex communication system within themselves. Like they split themselves up into like 5 different sort of groupings. One was going to be responsible for infrastructure. One was going to be responsible for culture. One group was going to be responsible, 5 different sort of subgroupings within this world. And then anything that had to be built, somebody had to go out and research it and come back and report to the group. And then the group would decide, yes, we're going to build this or not. So the first thing that they decided was, okay, we need an energy system in here. So now you can see like the group, because they've put these systems into place themselves, they are now starting to hum, they're starting to work, right? It's not going into chaos, it's going the other way now. They decided, okay, we need to build an energy source. Like we were an inner city Melbourne school, so like inner city being like hipster kind of Melbourne school. So like the first, everybody wanted wind farms because it was like, that would be the thing to do. Now this sounds like a cliche, but it's not. We had one student who was, and which is kind of ironic seeing we're in the middle of this like Russian war at the moment, but like there was one student whose parents were Russian scientists and they had immigrated to Australia. And he said, I remember this as a 12-year-old, he said, no, I think we should have nuclear, right? Nuclear energy. And he came and said, can I build a nuclear power station? To which the teachers, who knew nothing about nuclear power, said, it's up to you to convince the rest. And so what he did was he then went on, essentially went on a crusade to teach all 140 of the kids about what nuclear power was and how to what splitting an atom meant. And, he's basically moving down to some fairly complex physics, which nobody in the group, two teachers included, had any awareness or knowledge of prior to this happening, right? He brought his parents so they gave us some lectures. He brought in like external resources, etc. And so that is an example of emergent phenomenon right there, in terms of like the group was starting to teach itself well beyond the capacity of any of the data of the individuals prior to the commencement of the group. And there's so many stories of that sort of stuff happening. The group voted him down and we built wind farms. But the actual story in itself is kind of interesting. And when I looked at my data at the end, which is massive, there was so much of that stuff happening where like essentially the kids were teaching themselves things well beyond all the curriculum got covered, by the way, like all of it got covered, but we went well beyond, because we'd set up systems to enable that to happen. So from that, I then went and took all of that and then looked at a school and said, what is it that enables this kind of, now what I'm doing is redefining creativity. It's not being an individual experience, but rather it's a collective experience. It's a collective process, right? It's not an individual experience. Mm-hmm. So when you look at it like that, you can then look at systems like schools, or you can look at systems like organizations and go, what have they got within them that either hinder it, like what feature sets or what structural things that have they got in place that hinder or enable collective creativity? And then, do they want that or not? So essentially, we're looking at building cultures of innovation. How was that for a really long answer?
I love it. No, this is catnip to me. So it's so interesting to me, the way that you're looking at emerging phenomena. And the thing that popped out at me, and there were many, but one of the things that popped out at me was that, like in the nuclear option, in your example, that student had to believe in his point of view. He had to believe in it, and then he had to be curious enough to go look it up, whether it's to bring in his parents or to do the research himself. And then the other kids had to evaluate what he did. So can you talk a little bit about that, about how what your data said and how you managed that, or did the kids manage it all themselves?
Yeah, they managed it all themselves. It was really fascinating. But so our role as teachers, and to shift a school to this kind of way of thinking takes kind of quite a few years, by the way, to do it. And so I've been working in leadership for a few years to train how to think this way, because our schooling system is set up in a reductionist way, which is completely diametrically opposed to this way of thinking, essentially. Right. Reductionism sort of always drilling down for the answer, while this is like looking for emergent phenomenon. What we did is we set up so two data sets we had. One was the Minecraft server itself. And so in the Minecraft server, you can collect a lot of data in terms of what's actually going on, what they're building. Secondly, we built a wiki for them. And so every child had their own wiki page. Every district, they called them. So the industrial district or the cultural district had their own page. And then running off that main page, sort of like a Christmas tree, like, running off that main page, every child linked to that district had their own sub pages. And so all of their learnings were going into the wiki. And so like a wiki, like everybody can see everybody else's work, and then everybody can comment into everybody else's work. And then also everybody can actually go into everybody else's work and make changes as necessary. So it was applying that kind of way of thinking. And in that, what you're doing there is you're moving away again from like the individual kind of like understanding of learning, where teacher stands at front of the class, delivers a whole bunch of outdated, boring content. You're an empty vessel that are meant to just open your neck and get this stuff poured down your throat. And then your work, which is just like, say, look at the way they do maths, like repeating sums over and over and over again for the hope that you'll learn some sort of process or algorithm. Your work sits in a book, right, that nobody else sees. Sometimes the teacher sees it, and some to provide feedback, sometimes, but not at point of need. Usually it's like 2 or 3 weeks after you've written the essay or whatever it is. So it's sort of meaningless feedback. But basically it all just sits in your head in that book. So the work that we do now, and sort of the work that NRUS does now, is encouraging how do we get collective thought out into some form of space where everybody can see it all. And then when you do that, it can all be shifted around and moved and connected and collected and shaped together. And so the collective thought being far more important than any individual thought, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does. It absolutely does. And it brings me back to my former question about curiosity, because you said the data can then be looked at in different directions and from different perspectives. But the curiosity piece of that has to be there. The kids have to, the students, the employees, the members of whoever, they have to be curious enough about what they have done or what they're trying to do in order to pursue it, and then also to look at it afterwards. Can you talk a little bit about what role curiosity plays in all of this, and also inquiry?
Yeah, great. I love how you threw it into the inquiry word. It plays an enormous role. And you know what, like I see, like curiosity is not a thing that we have to like teach. Curiosity is innate in us all, that the system blocks out of us, right? And so our role is to just like enable it. Like these kids are naturally curious, and as are like if like if I'm working in a software development company, if I'm working in an organization, like I am naturally curious about everything. Like, and I think like the older we are, the older we get that more and more like taken out of us, or like reduced from us, or we actually just get it smashed out of us, to believe it or not. So that we think our role in an organization becomes like an output based, like just do this. And you never really understand why you're doing it. You don't understand how it links to something broader. But when you create a system, when you create organizations or teams within companies where they can see the impact of what they're doing and how it's impacting something else, right? You are naturally increasing the curiosity that is already there, but it has been bashed out of them, essentially. So curiosity plays a huge role. Like in learning, if you just go back to kids, if you're providing no real world authentic link to the learning, like how can they be curious? Like you're forcing them. It's like the way I was taught maths back in the bad old days, which still exists today. Right. Like where you're just learning a series of like algorithms and you're just repeating them over and over and over again, but you cannot see the link to the real world, right? And so without the link to the real world, I am not at all curious about it. But if you provide that for me, like, and I always used to think I was dumb, and I've got 5 degrees and a PhD and blah blah blah, and I was told I was dumb at school because there was no like link, and I'm a very curious human being who is curious about everything. But my schooling like really like reduced that out of me, and so like and it made me believe that like that was like not a thing to be valued. Whereas as you know, and as I know too, you increase curiosity and like, watch what happens. So you increase curiosity within an organization or with a company, and watch what happens in your company. The innovation and the self-organization and the meaningfulness of like people finding meaning in their work just goes through the roof. And when that happens, you have a company that actually values human beings. It actually values their curiosity. It actually values their creativity, and it doesn't like slam down on them dependent on what you, the leader, thinks is the most important thing. And your company just grows exponentially.
Ah, you're singing my song. Absolutely. Right? I mean, really, this is
Your turn.
Exactly. I'm like, okay, yes, and let's just repeat that for the next 15 minutes, and we're good to go. No, but here's the thing, right? So what that says to me, and this is one of those age-old sort of conundrums that we end up working through and with, is the leadership of any organization, whether it's a principal or a teacher down into the sort of more microcosm, or the leader of a team or the head of a company. They have to change their mindset. I mean, that's why this podcast is called The Innovative Mindset, is because they need to change their mindset in order for some of this stuff to flourish, right? You're talking about complex group theory, yay, but that doesn't get to happen unless the leadership of all of these different entities is open-minded enough to go, let's try it. So what are your strategies when you walk into a new company or a new school or a new organization? How do you get leadership or administration buy-in for something that is pretty radically different than what they're used to?
Great, really great question. And you know what? One of the reasons why I really wanted to come onto your podcast is because of the title, The Innovative Mindset, and it is all about a mindset. And let me just talk about mindset for a couple of minutes as well. And please pull me back to your question if I go off on a tangent, because I do have some things I would like to share with everybody
Absolutely.
about how to do it. Mindset change is super difficult, super difficult, right? We have a mindset placed on us. From a very young age, depending on a variety of things. I personally had a particularly reductionist mindset, which is valued binaries, like right, wrong, good, bad, this black, white. And so to shift to this way of thinking has taken me like 40 odd years of hard work, right? It's really hard work to actually go, no, there's another way of seeing the world. There are other possibilities that you are not seeing because of your mindset. So I acknowledge how difficult it is. One of the reasons it's really difficult, especially in the West, is because you have to look at the theoretical discourses that drive our thinking, right? Now, this might be getting way up there, but this is stuff I love talking about. The theoretical discourse that drives most of the Western thinking is a discourse called reductionism, right? Reductionism, and it drives our education system. It drives how our companies are set up. It drives the military is essentially the most reductionist of all. It drives our medical system, drives everything, right? Where it's looking for an answer, and it says that to find the answer, drill down, and you will find the answer. There it is, right there. Okay. Now, this reductionist thinking hits us in the age of enlightenment when we essentially start naming and categorizing everything. Okay. And I'm not critiquing it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It just is. It just is, right? But it doesn't mean it is the only thing. There is complexity as a mindset is another thing that's sweeping through. So when you look at and it's causing a lot of tension right now in the West. It's the thing that I think is causing the most amount of tension. And it really is causing a lot of tension in the education system. So complexity is the complete opposite, right? Where it is doing what I was just talking about before. And you can see in industry, so when we talk about agile ways of thinking or agile approaches to software development, right, that is drawing from a different mindset. Okay. And so, but not being able to understand the theoretical drives of both of those discourses, you can get very, very lost in it. And that's why a lot of educators are lost right now, because they go, we don't know what to do, because should we there's all this stuff about pushing towards inquiry, but there's this other thing about just pushing towards reading, writing and math, and that's the clash. And so understanding some of that discourse theory is really key. It's really key to help people go, this is what's actually predetermining the way I think. Now, mindset shift when it comes to how we work, right? So the way I'm talking about is the way of possibility, not predictability, right? And so and it's abstract. It is very abstract. I totally acknowledge that. The only way you can learn this, you can't learn this from listening to this podcast, by the way, because it's just abstract concepts that you're hearing right now. The only way you can learn this is through experience, right? Sure. Through experience. And so it's through experience that we learn together. And so a lot of the work that we do is quite often we'll be with an organization and they'll just know that they need to change something, and they'll just bring us in and they'll go, why don't we just do 3 or 4 days here or there? It's like, okay, let's do that. And so we'll come in and we will give them an experience, like working in this kind of environment, where what will generally happen is they will initially go through a period of ambiguity and confusion. And I'll say that's completely fine. Like, it's not a bad thing that you're feeling overwhelmed and, whatever. And then there will be this point of synthesis, right? So we might run them through a design thinking process, because design thinking is it's a particularly good process, and like to help them shift mindsets, because design thinking really values like the collective. It really values like it doesn't value the individual, and it values like the concepts of creativity coming from the collective. The first piece of design thinking is what we would call discovery or immersion, right? In discovery and immersion, if we immerse, say, like a school into itself, right, or an organization into itself, all this stuff starts coming out. And if you're good at facilitating this stuff, right, you are allowing, you've created a non-hierarchical structure within the team that you've put together. So you might have like senior leadership in that team, you might have junior staff, you might have like students, you might have whatever. They're all in this team together, but you've created an environment that's non-hierarchical. Mm-hmm. So all of their voices are valued. Now, it takes a particular skill to do that, right? And it takes but it is possible. You move really quickly and you do it, and then you start immersing them deeply, and all of this stuff just starts coming out, right? Like, and I say, this is all the problems start coming out, but problems are not a bad thing. Problems being a fantastic thing, because when we discover a problem, like we have discovered the thing that we can design around, which means we can innovate and change. That's how change happens. So let's go and discover the most complex problem that we could find. So my role is to keep immersing them until, like, you've got like their collective thinking is all over the walls, or it's everywhere, right? And this is the point that they are feeling very, very overwhelmed.
For sure.
And then it's my role, or my team's role, to know when they, just before they get too overwhelmed, to go, now we need to start synthesizing it. And when you synthesize, what you're doing is you're getting them to collectively group and theme. And so you'll move these sticky notes over there, and those over there, and those over there, but you're teaching them how to do it rather than doing it for them, right? Mm-hmm. And so in that, but you're teaching them how to do this collectively, which is really, really tricky, because people get frustrated, go, why are you moving my stuff? And then, like, the role there, for my role there, is to teach them to disconnect to, like, the data. It is just data, and it is not your data. It is just our collective data. And let's see if we can start theming. Over a period of time, they'll learn how to do it, and suddenly they start seeing all these themes emerging that they could not see before, because they're doing it collectively, right? And then you get them to do it again, get them to do it again, get them to do it again, until finally they've got to this point where it is very, very clear, and they go, oh, that's the problem I want to work on, or that's the problem we want to work on as a team. And we never saw that before, right? And that's the moment, that is the moment where they have had a mindset shift, and they now see the world completely differently. And I have had in many, many, many workshops, be that senior board, working with senior boards of major corporations, or whoever, it doesn't really matter. Quite often they burst into tears in that moment, right? And they go, I now see the world completely differently. And what they're seeing is the ability to create collectively and work on something collectively. And they're seeing the world from a collective creativity perspective. That's how you shift mindsets.
Yikes. All right. Wow. And yes, I do still want to come back to that original question of how you get the buy-in from the leadership. I do want to come back to that, and we will. But there's something that you said that I really want to touch on, and that is, to me, that sense of ownership shifting, right? Mm-hmm. This is my perspective, this is my data point. What are you messing with it for? And to me, when I work with my clients, I talk about sort of becoming aware and curious, and asking the questions like, what is your reason for doing that? Yes. And seeing what those reasons are. When you have that kind of ownership transfer, if you will, transformation maybe from the individual to the collective, what are the processes that you see people going through, and what results do you see them come to? What ideas do you see them come to once they've done that?
Yeah, let's deal with the ideas. So the ideas are transformational, and so that's really what I'm interested in, transformational change, right? And because I believe, the values of my company are connect, learn, create, change. Connect. It's all about connectivity. Increase the type and the amount of connectivity. Learn. We learn collectively. Create. We create collectively. Change. It all leads to change. These things are not for. They're not for individual concepts. They're all interwoven, and they affect each other, right? But change, and then I always say, because you know what change is? It's life. It's called life. It's just called life. And let's have more life. Life, please. Yeah. So transformational change means more life. And so that's the results are. The results are when you do this, and please, I've just lost the start of your question again. You're really good at asking these questions that just make me go. But the results are the difference between the way our organization does it and a lot of other organizations, and I anticipate that you do it in a similar way to us, is we won't come in and do the data gathering and data analysis and leave you with a big pile of notes saying, here's your problem, here's how you should fix it, right? We come in and do it. We guide you through it. So they are learning this process and they are learning this mindset shift themselves. And so therefore, the problem that they discover, and it's my role just to increase the complexity of it. The problem they discover is truly their own. And then the solution that they come to is truly their own. And it's truly transformational because it's by learning to do it collectively, the ideas will always be far better than if it was just left up to one person. But also, it also acknowledges the buy-in is huge because everybody feels equally as part of it. And so everybody now really wants to solve this. And so if you're looking at product development, right, or if you're looking at whatever it is that you're looking at, the product that comes is far more significant. It's far more meaningful because this is also not about just connecting within your team. It's also connecting with the environment that you exist within. All right. And so in doing so, the product that you develop will actually have meaningful results within whatever community you're designing for. So that's the result. What was the first part of the question?
You actually answered both, but the thing about buy-in that has always made me curious. I'm going to tell you a little story. Here we go. Yeah, so please. I was working with a school, and it was a math teacher who had gotten a little grant for me to come in, and we decided that what we were going to do was have the sixth graders design their own sixth grade wing, because that's what the school was looking at. They were looking at designing a sixth grade wing. And so we said, let's do it. So the students and I, we worked out what they would need to know how to do. They would need to know how to do, blueprints and architecture and looking at the soil and looking at the landscape and looking at the slope of the soil and stuff around the school. The kids came up with that. The principal was sort of not really consulted about whether or not we were going to do this. But what happened was, when he found out, was not thrilled until he came in when we were doing our field work and we were actually laying out and measuring what the school new wing would look like. And the kids themselves came up with the architectural drawings and the concepts and all of that. And he came outside and he watched them measuring and collaborating and looking at it all together. And then he was thrilled. And it's become a yearly project that the school does now. So the question I have for you about this is that in that situation, we got absolute buy-in from the principal, but kind of after the fact. Yeah. How do you get initial support from these decision makers when you're working with a new school or a new school district or a new company or an organization? Do you need to go to them and show them proof in the pudding first, or do you have some strategies, and if so, what are they, so that if a leader goes, wait, this might be something I want, how do I even begin to think about it? What do you need to tell them, or what do you need to show them to get that buy-in?
That's a really great question. So why don't I throw it back on you? Why did the principal, at that moment when the buy-in happened, why did the buy-in happen then?
Oh, because he saw the students engaged and excited and saw the process as it occurred. He saw them being curious. He said that he saw them applying these really complicated concepts. And and by the way, just so you know, some of their designs were submitted as the potential designs for the school.
Okay.
And so that kind of thing had real world results, real world application. And, he and I talked, and he was just blown away about how engaged the students were. So he saw it happening, and that is what made it happen for him.
There you go. So I think the answer is right there. And so you need to involve all stakeholders really early in the process, because what we're talking about is quite abstract, because it is diametrically opposed to, remember, like the discourse like when you look at discourse theory, so reductionism as being the most powerful. Like if you look at what Foucault would say, like discourse actually predetermines the way we think, act, and do, right? So and it is the case. If you walk into a classroom, I can walk into any classroom and I can tell you from everything that's on that wall exactly what that classroom teacher believes, right? And how that classroom is set out, because it's been predetermined by the theory that's driving their belief system, right? So the principle might not even have, like, unless they're included early on in the process, they can only believe what they believe, which they believe this X, Y, and Z is how we teach and learn. And so if you're moving to like project-based learning or voice and choice for students, it's like, what is that? That's very abstract for a lot of people until they've experienced it. So including them as part of the process really on is one of my tricks, so to say. So that first, like, quite often when I work in a school, and if we're working in a school on like strategic projects, right, or developing strategy, right, I will put a design team together that has members of the board, not the whole board, like 2 or 3 members of the board, some senior leadership, some senior staff, faculty, some very junior faculty, students, and parents, right? So and admin. So you're kind of covering everybody, right? And that design team, right, they're there because you're trying to get a representation of the collective experience or the collective thinking, right? But those first few sessions will be quite challenging from the perspective of me as a facilitator, or, because they have never experienced this way of working before. So typically, like when you do strategy with a school, right? Who does strategy? The board, and maybe the very senior leadership. Probably the worst people to do the strategy for the school. Why? Because they only know education from the way that they experienced education, which is generally like 40 years ago, right?
Right.
And so, and they're brought together for like a 2-day retreat to do strategy, where like all the pressure is on them, and they really aren't representing. They're representing a particular way of thinking, but they're not representing actually how education has moved, and how can they, right? So when you change it to this format where the board will be represented, but the pressure is not on them to come up with a strategy, you get increased buy-in, you get increased activity, but you also get an increased completion of tasks. So when you look at like the traditional ways of doing strategy, like 20 to 25% of strategic projects actually get completed, and then 75% don't in the normal way of doing strategy. And so the normal way of doing strategy is the board do it every 3 to 5 years. They create the strategy in 2 days. They put together some subcommittees. Off you go, and let's see what happens, right? So very little it's very inefficient, and it's very, very unprogressive. When you do this way, where they will be represented and they will be consulted, so that design team is brought together. Their role is I help them immerse themselves into themselves and into the school, and then I teach them how to do it, so they go back to their representative groups and they keep doing it. So the board does get involved, but it gets involved in a much more sort of like appropriate place instead of a top-down approach. It's like you bring your skills. What are your skills? Your skills are meant to be like you've got experience in the real world or whatever it is. Bring those in, but don't bring them in. Don't feel like you have to make the entire decision for the entire school. That's ridiculous. And so, so by doing that, you're shifting the mindsets by trying to give everybody an experience at the same time of this new way of thinking, a new way of doing. In that, the strategic projects that they will land, like the problems that they will discover, which is what strategy is meant to be, will be far more significant and far more real because everybody's like had some sort of voice in it. And then the projects that they design to overcome those like, even if it's just simple things like increase enrollment, or even if it's things like, which like COVID has had a huge sort of like, it's COVID has had, like, one of the things COVID's really shone a light on is the old ways of doing things are just gone. Like, it's just, you can't, the need for flexibility within education and the need for agility within education is just being screamed for at the moment. And so the old way is gone. And so then what they will design, like, coming out of this process will be far more impactful, where everybody feels like they have a role. And you know what it really does? It actually unites the school. It actually brings them together, like it does with organizations, with all teams. It brings them together and everybody finds meaning, and everybody finds, this is the place that I want to be because I've had a role to play in designing the strategy.
I'm taking all of that in for a second.
I talk fast, don't I? And I'm
no. Do not, never apologize for that. It's just you are giving me and anyone who's listening just a ton to think about. It's interesting. You mentioned this notion of, we're having to do everything differently because of COVID, because in 2 weeks everything shut down a little over 2 years ago. And how do we do that? How do we navigate that in schools, in organizations, and businesses in order to maintain some of that collective that you talk about? What do we need to do? How do we need to design our new community, our new way of doing things, whether you're a small company, a large company, a school, and it might all be the same or it might all be different. How do we do that in this new way that we're having to live and work?
Yeah, we do it like consciously. But that is a really great question. And so let me talk about like the COVID situation with schools. So prior to COVID, we worked with a number of schools here in the States. And one of the problems that came up, which they could not see previously to our work, was like the disconnection between like stakeholders within the school. Okay, schools are quite isolated places, but they think that they have a sense of community, but they really don't. Mm-hmm. They work in silos. So those silos might be departmental silos, or they might be the silo of teacher student, right? Mm-hmm. And so in those silos, like with one particular school, I'll give you an example. I won't name the names, but whatever. Like, we've done some extensive work, and this is a really courageous and brave school, and they were really pushing into like, we want to be innovative. We need to change. What does that mean? And so they brought us in. One of the problems we found was like all teachers teach, right? And because they want a relationship with the students, right? It's key to why you take that job on. It's like part of the role. And they all think that they have great relationships. When we went out and actually like tested that, we found the complete opposite was the case in terms of like most of the students were highly stressed. They're all on anxiety medication. They're all on, they want the teachers to like them, but they think the teachers hate them. This kind of stuff, which is typical to pretty much every school, right?
Wow.
It's really revealing to a teacher when they hear that, like, and it can be quite shocking. But it's also like fantastic. We have now found something that we can actually fix. Let's go and fix this. What can we design? So a bunch of the schools that we were working with were in that place, and then COVID hit, right? So COVID hit, and so we put the pause on all the work, so everybody had to, because everyone just got caught in the weeds of like just surviving, which is fair enough. 6, 7, 8 months into like the COVID experience, a lot of those schools called us back and said, hey, that problem of disconnection, it's actually just gotten worse. Can you come and help? Because of COVID, right? And so what COVID has been doing is like creating this incredible sense of isolation. Like, and so in the teaching profession or in education, like isolationism within like students, it's just increased the gap where people are feeling they are working so incredibly hard, but they feel like they're working on their own by themselves, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to reach out, and because schools were not set up for this, right? And so the disconnection is increasing. And then the second thing that I noticed was this very negative narrative that was hitting the media, or the media was pushing out, that like education or schools had failed us over the last 2 years. No learning had happened, and it's all been a great disaster, right? So you can imagine what that's doing to the morale of those working in that sector. That's why people are leaving in droves. So we then designed this service, which we called Listen, Learn, Leap, and essentially what we designed it to do was to enable a couple of things. Firstly, to bring people back together and just give them a chance to debrief on the experiences, right? What has actually happened. Secondly, to help them spot the innovation that actually has taken place, because innovation has taken place everywhere. It's just happening in siloed pockets, right? Like teachers are trying new things all over the place, but they have no chance to sort of share this learning with anyone. Mm-hmm. So to help schools spot the innovation, and then once you've spotted that innovation, help them unpack it, like from a pedagogical perspective. What does it actually mean when you used Zoom? What do you like? Don't just tell me that you used Zoom and you liked it or hated it. What about it? Like, did it work well or didn't work well for you? And actually some things have come through in terms of like, I never imagined I could do X, Y, Z. So you unpack it and then you help the school scale that across the school. So therefore they are now using the situation for a positive. They have turned it from a negative to a positive, and they're using it to scale innovation and change across the school. This is what we found happened, right? So we put together workshops where we would have faculty and we would have leadership and we'd have students all in the same workshop, right? And we would give them a chance to debrief. Generally, and if you do this, it's tricky. You've got to be able to do this as a facilitator, but if you have the skills to do it, like what happens is you create a space, which is a safe space where they can just talk. Very quickly, the teachers would get to this place where they would go, we feel like we have tried our hardest. I've tried everything. I've never worked harder. And I feel like I've failed you as a teacher, right? Very emotional experience. I like to hear that. It's very emotional. And then the students in that, almost always the students go, we feel like we were trying our hardest and we failed you, right? And so suddenly you've got like a bond happening right there. So what you're doing there is you're essentially creating this environment of collective healing, really is what's going on, where you're trying to show them there is no right or wrong here. We're all doing our best. It's just better if we do it together rather than in isolation. In that, they start bonding together as a community. And so then in the spotting of the innovations and the scaling of the innovations, what they're all craving is community. They actually want their school to be a community. But what you're allowing them to do now is consciously create the community that they want rather than having it created before them, which is what's always happened in the past. Like you just believe school is a community, but is it really a community? So now you're actually consciously becoming aware of like, this is what I need from this place. And so it's the same as in workspaces. Why do we go to work? I don't go to work to get a paycheck. We go to work to connect and consciously create the communities that we want. When you do that, the morale in the schools just goes from one of complete negativity to complete re-engagement, to where people have rediscovered their passion for why you do this job in the first place, which is about the connectivity. And so when that happens, the learning goes through the roof. If you want to just measure like how much learning happens from a quantifiable perspective, it goes through the roof because people now are operating on this, like they feel like they have a voice again. It's a really powerful program that we've got going with schools all around the world.
That's amazing. I love it. And I love that notion of the community is what encourages and empowers the engagement. I think it's so, yeah. I mean, I'm a little speechless, and it's my job not to be speechless. So let me bring myself back.
I'd like to hear some of your stories. You did this too. I did this as well.
Well, have me on your podcast, and I'll be delighted to share. No, but but you know what's interesting though, and speaking of community, to me, community it's no longer and hasn't been for some time just a classroom or just your local community. It's worldwide. So for example, when I did for many years, I worked for an environmental education program at NASA, and one of the things that I always wanted to do was create collaborations with schools that lived completely different parts of the world. A school that lives in Argentina might do a collaboration with a school that lives in the USA, or one that is in Melbourne might work with one that is in Cape Town, South Africa, right? And then they could do the science together, they come up with the research together, and they worked on the collaboration together, these students. And so when we're doing that, when we're talking about this notion of community, it's changed. The internet has changed it, but even your son working with 5 different ways of connecting, all of that is it's morphing now, it's transforming now into something even bigger. What's your vision for that? What do you imagine? Because I love playing what if and imagine if. What might be happening here, and how can we best really work with it to make sure that we're moving into the new future in a really creative, community-based way?
My vision is a global mindset shift that embraces complexity and moves from reductionism.
And done.
Well, no, actually it is, to be honest with you. And so when you talk about like what is creativity, so like, and I mean, I'm trying to get this into I've got a book coming out soon, and I'm trying to like just get this into a way that's sort of like, it's conceptually really quite difficult, but it's actually conceptually really quite easy. Like, so where we embrace the notion of other, right? So like what you were doing there with your NASA stuff, which I find really interesting, is like you're moving it because you can move it globally. So you can move it into the embracing of the other. So the notion of becoming, like what might it become if we include other, right? Rather than just self all the time. And so then I talk about like continually becoming other. Like what does that mean? Like the continual becoming other, which is really about the empathy kind of piece. Like developing empathy is really hugely important. So imagine if we had a world which embraced the concept of empathy, not just empathy for like when I talk about empathy, I talk about an empathy for like self, right? Like empathy for self, to like look at all the things that in me that are actually stopping me hearing you, Isola, because I talk a lot too. But like, but you know, hearing other is really difficult. It's actually very difficult to do because that's the mindset stuff. There's so much in us that like just tells us to keep listening to ourselves. So helping ourselves develop empathy for ourselves to then develop empathy for other. The more I can understand myself, the more I can hear you. And then likewise, if I'm doing that, I'm creating this space where it allows you to do that with me. And in that space, right, when we're doing that, that's what I call the space to be, or the space of becoming. That's where the emergent phenomenon arises. That's where the creativity happens. And so moving to this mindset of like embracing that, rather than this mindset of ownership or mindset of like, it's my way or the highway, like that's really what I'm trying to push towards, which means, you know, and like the age of anxiety, right? Like it's the age right now. Where's anxiety come from? Anxiety comes from the old way of doing things, where it's like self compared to what? Self compared to other, rather than like understanding of self to shift self to connect with other. Like I have no anxiety if like you and me are actually like doing that with each other, where we're trying to listen and understand each other. And in that, like, create something together. That doesn't create anxiety. What it does create anxiety is when I'm competing against you, right? And I'm going, you know, she says that, but she doesn't really know anything about what she's talking about. Like watch this. I'll know. Like who does that create anxiety for? You and me, right? For sure. Absolutely. So, moving from that to this new way of thinking, for me, all that's in there too, in terms of like helping, like it really like I guess that's sort of like a next level up, but like that's really also what I'm trying to do as well.
Sign me up. I love it.
Yeah, you're in.
And I really want you to come back when your book comes out and chat more about this, because to me, listening to you, and I'm thinking about my own work at the same time, you know, one of the things that I love when this happens is, and one of the reasons I encourage collaborations multiculturally, is because it gives you that sense of learning about the culture that other people have. So, sorry, hold on. So learning about each other's cultures and remove, like, the way you put it was really interesting about other. To me, there's nothing wrong with other. unless we place a value judgment on other being worse or better, right?
Beautifully said. Beautifully
So
said.
so that's the way I approach it. And so when you're talking about these communities, this collaborative, connective tissue almost, when we're in this and you're trying to design it for a company, what is your process of designing it? Or is it in process with the company? Like they come to you and they say, hey, this is our need. We figured out our need. We need you to help us get there. What do you do to help them understand that maybe that isn't actually their need? Or is that sort of cultural collective that you were talking about earlier? Because there's been so much. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this episode and really figure out everything. What are you doing to design it? Is it in process, or do you come in with a design based on having heard what they say?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it is a mixture. So it's a mixture of like existing tools and bespoke tools, especially for them, and so, or a bespoke process, especially for them. So when they come to you with a need, I think like the listen, learn, leap stuff that we do, which is the COVID stuff, like can be you can kind of replicate that over and over again, because that's essentially trying to do, it's trying to work the same need, but it's also like, we don't assume that like everybody's experience is the same. And so we don't assume that your experience of COVID is the same as mine. And so therefore this is a one-stop fits all like kind of shop. We never kind of do it like that. So when an organization comes to us with a need, like it might be like the need to develop strategy, or it might be a need to unpack who they are, like to develop their values, or it might be a need to, like even in schools, like a need to change the way they do curriculum design, right? We have a fairly good understanding of what that means, but at the same time, we are very high touch, which means we like to like really get to know the client, and so bespoke, especially for them. And so the process therefore, and I guess like this is the difference for us, is the process is, like I said before, we help them dive into that need, right? We guide them through that process, and then we help them design through a process of design the solutions. Okay, so it's not us coming in and doing it to them; we do it with them.
I love that. That's yay. Again, your words are coming out of my words. My thoughts are coming out of your mouth. Yes, absolutely. So speaking of creative and inspiration, you and I share another facet of our lives, and that we're both musicians and composers. And I'd love to pivot just a little bit for the last couple of minutes of this and ask you a little bit about that, about you said earlier on that your wife said, okay, it's time to make money. You need to do something else. But you're a musician, you're a composer. Can you talk a little bit about being a musician and composer and how that influenced you moving into education? What parts of that did you take into the work you're doing now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really should take that story back about my wife. She really didn't do that to me. There's no one more creative than her, and she fully encourages that part of my life. And it is a hugely important part of my life, and actually almost like a second career, which I can imagine is the same for you. What I took from that is a couple of things. Firstly, I'm a jazz musician primarily. Like that's how I started. So like I did, studied degree in jazz improvisation. Jazz music is all about listening. Like it really, really is all about listening, and it's about developing your voice. But it's like you develop your voice within context. It's always in context, and so a jazz musician who does not listen is like the worst musician, the worst performer on the stage. They can be blasting away with the most amazing, like fast, high solos, but if it's not connected, it's like they're creating animosity on stage, and like then that's energy that the crowd's going to hear, and so they really like it's not so it's all about learning how to listen, which means it's all about like learning how to create, and create collectively. Like the greatest jazz is like, if you look at like Miles Davis's quintets, where it's like with Herbie and like, that band, it is a collective spontaneous creativity that is happening in real time, and it is about deep listening. And so that's essentially the core of what we do at our work as well, in terms of, those schools that we're talking about, like who are transforming and creating the community they want to create. we help them become the listening school, to listen to each other. When we listen, rather than telling, we listen. And when we listen, all this stuff comes out. So that's one of the things that really learned how to, that's really helped me. The second one is the ability to self-organize, like, so self-organizing teams. So that's essentially what jazz musicians are. And like, where you can get onto stage, and many, many times in my career, I've walked onto a stage and you're introducing yourself to the other musicians on stage as you're about to do the concert. Hi, g'day, my name's Kynan. Yep. Well, okay, what are we playing tonight? Okay, it's African music. Okay, off we go. So you kind of have a baseline understanding of the genre, but you're really having to create and self-organize on stage very, very quickly. And so jazz musicians are particularly good at that. They're also particularly good at like just connecting beyond, like, it doesn't really matter if you're a 16-year-old or a 70-year-old, like, we need to connect right now on a stage. And so it moves beyond, the musicians are particularly good at connecting with humanity in that way, which is something I really took. The other thing that I really took is the composer aspect. When I started teaching, right, like as a music teacher, I decided, like, these kids get 1 hour a week of music if they're lucky. Why the heck would I teach them notation? Like most music courses are about teaching them ta, ti, ti, ta, quaver, crotchet, quaver. Like, why would I teach them that? So I decided to flip the whole thing and turned it into a compositional class. And so from like, and I was working with an elementary school at the time. And so essentially you're empowering them to be composers, just like most, we value children's drawings and children's pictures, but we don't value their musical compositions. And so I moved it into this place of like just teaching them how to be composers, which means teaching them how to create, how to use their ears and how to put sound together, essentially, is what you're doing, right? And then what was really interesting is there's always this point where they go, where they're getting quite sophisticated at it, and they can create 2, 3, 4 part harmony. They can create rhythm parts. They can create, they've got it all down. I've never mentioned notation once. There's always this point where they go, hey, I'd really like to write this down so that we could perform it again maybe tomorrow. I can remember how to do it. And it's like, yeah, go write it down, figure out a system yourself. And then they'll go and try and invent a system of notation. And then they'll always get stumped on something. And you can walk over and you can go, why don't you try this? And then you introduce some traditional notation to them, right? Which is like, let's use some quarter notes and some, eighth notes and blah, blah, blah. And they always go, oh, this is awesome. How come nobody's ever thought of this before? Which is suddenly like that, the notation has real meaning for them. So it's in time, right? And they have instantly learnt traditional notation. Like they've instantly learnt it. Like, and if it's taken like 10 seconds rather than like the laborious sort of lessons they might have got before. So in doing that, like what I was trying to do for them was like empower them into being like, empower their voice. And what I found really interesting after like that particular program, which I sort of worked at for about 7 years, by the time like I got to my 7th year, the kids who had started as 6-year-olds who are now like 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds, right? In a 40-minute lesson, they could compose something which had like ABA, maybe like so 3 parts or 2 parts repeating. It would have rhythmic parts to it. It would have melody. It would have like counterpart written into it, etc. At a level of sophistication far higher than I could get my university students to compose at, which is really fascinating, do you reckon? Because all I had done was empower them from a young age. That's all I'd done, like nothing much else. But that's how fast they could learn. Whereas the kids who had gone through a traditional system, and then I'd hit them at university and had to start teaching them composition, it took them so much time to get to that place because they were really intimidated by composition.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Daniel Coyle, I don't know if you've read The Culture Code. He talks in the very beginning of that book all about he gave spaghetti, marshmallows, and a couple of other things to a bunch of kids, like 5-year-olds, a bunch of engineers, and a bunch of MBA students. And he said, okay, go make the tallest structure you can out of these materials. And inevitably, the kids were the ones who made the tallest structure, in part because they just did, instead of worrying about whether or not they were going to say the right thing, or looking at the structural, they just did. They tried. And inevitably, he said 201, the kids were the ones who ended up with the tall structures. And so one of the things that in listening to what you're saying, I'm thinking, at least some of this is they had the need, and then that traditional notation became the application that they, became the support system to their creativity, which I think is wonderful. But some of it is confidence, right? They didn't know not to have confidence in their own abilities. Whereas by the time a kid hits university, they might have already lost some of that confidence in their own creativity. What thoughts do you have about maintaining that level of confidence in your own ability to create?
100%, you're 100% spot on. And like, that's what when in those early days, that's what I was trying to do. I used to use the words demystify the role of the composer. So like only the great, and this is from my personal experience, having gone through it myself. Like I really learned to be a composer later in my life because I was so intimidated by it. Like we could never be a Mozart or a Beethoven, which is all nonsense. Like, so it was all about that confidence, just giving them that confidence early on. And once they had that confidence, they can just go and do it. And, like it's not only confidence in traditional notation. It's also because like, if you look at most music composition these days, it doesn't require traditional notation. Like, we have moved well beyond composing for the orchestra.
For sure.
So it's just the confidence in their voice. And so, but then let's return to what I talk about in regards to creativity. It's a collective experience, right? So the confidence is finding their way in a team to collectively contribute in a meaningful way. That's the confidence. So once again, like not thinking my idea, I own it. So is my this is like, I put out an album. That's all my album. What do people think about it? That's not really what it's about. It's like the collective, like how do we collectively create, which is of interest to me. And in the collectivity, that's when we find our collective confidence. And so take that back to the workplace, organizations that have moved down the path of self-organizing teams, right? Where team members feel valued, right? And meaningfully valued because they are part of a collective creative team that understands its connection to the greater whole and is creating in that way rather than being told what to do, which always kills confidence.
Interesting. And what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that connectivity, that connection isn't just from the person who might have made it, but it also, for example, in music, is also partially the listener, what their experience is of it.
100%.
So,
yes.
and I love that. I love that notion. And we'll be exploring it further because as a composer, I'm a singer and I'm a guitarist and a violinist, and as a composer, some of it is I compose for myself to play. Some of it is I compose for my band to play, whatever. But I cannot do it by myself. And so we keep coming back to this notion of collective. And your idea is that we all need to be creatively one big creative collective, which I love. So let me ask you I have two more questions before we reach the bonus round. What is your next step? What is the next step for you, Kynan Robinson, to make this happen?
Jeez. It's a linear step, is it?
It can be.
I'm teasing you.
No, it can be. But the thing is, and here's the thing for me, everything for me always comes back to mindfulness, right? So building the awareness for myself that I might want to see a change has to happen first, right? So for you, there must be a first thing, whether that first thing is change the world now or I'm going to have another cup of coffee. What is that next thing for you?
Oh, that's awesome. That question has really thrown me, actually.
That was my aim all along.
I don't think I need another coffee. The next step, okay, the next step for us, this is really interesting because my wife just ran me through this process over the weekend to do exactly this. What is that next step? Because my organization, so NRUSC, we work in this area. And so it's the continual honing of our work, who we work with, why we do it, to make sure that we're always pushing towards this value system, right? And so I guess, but I don't really want to talk about that. What's the next? My wife is actually really pushing the book. My book is actually the next step. To be honest with you.
Cool.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm glad you asked me this question because this is what she's been forcing out of me too. It's in terms of you need to get this into a format that is like understandable.
Well, but what's really funny about that? I've written 6 books, and I totally understand where your wife's coming from. But it's not just understandable. It's, quite frankly, much as I would love to have you on the show every day from now until the year 2030. You can't do that, right? You're one person in these ideas right now, even though you have a collective that works with you. So to me, getting it in that kind of format allows more people to have access to your ideas. And that to me is the value of this, is more people will get to understand your thinking and your processes. So yay.
Yeah. And I am right in the middle of it. And it is, I've got to tell you, it's I'm finding it really, really difficult. So like it's essentially finished, but then it's like like just looking at the format, like trying to find the voice in it is really challenging. Like, what is the voice? What is my voice here? Because I've written in very academic voices, I've written in very creative voices, but finding the voice for this that's my greatest challenge right now. And even if you look at what I've written, like each chapter almost comes from a different voice, if that makes any sense to you.
For sure.
Sometimes I speak in this, like sometimes I write in what I would call very ochre Australian, like, righto, here's how it is. Let me stop beating around the bush and let me just tell you, this and this is stupid. This is the way to do it, like that kind of way. And then there's other parts which are really like poetic and literal, and I mean literary and fluid. And it's like, it's like, whoa, where is this writing going? And then there's other parts which are heavily academic. And so that's my next challenge, is to find a consistent voice that goes across this book that helps it reach as many people as I can get it to.
Yeah, I
really
understand.
Yeah.
It is and it isn't. And here's why, right? First of all, you talk beautifully. So here's my suggestion, and this is what I suggest to a lot of my clients. Speak it. Yeah. Speak it, right? Record it voice to text and or read it out loud, because that will show you where it is you speaking your voice. And
great idea.
It's really, I work with a lot of people teaching them how to do this kind of writing. And it is really, you will know much better when it's you and when it's not you, if you speak it out loud. So, and it will be very clear immediately. And speak, if your wife sounds like she's very, very much a supporter. So see if you can speak it to her. It will. She
is sick of hearing it.
Well, you know what? You and I will get together and you can speak it to me. But yeah, I mean, I really want to encourage you to think about that, because that's one of the best ways to really flesh out your voice, is to speak it out loud, because then it's I've written 6 books, as I said. They've all been voice to text. Every single one of them has been voice to text. Yes. I speak better than I write with my fingers. When I try to do it with my fingers, what happens is I start getting I'm going to be very purposeful with what I write. I have to choose just the right words.
Yeah.
Which becomes too careful. So to get myself to stop being too careful, I say it. And once I say it, then I edit it. But it changes everything. And I have a dear friend who recently passed away, but she was at the NPR, National Public Radio here in the USA, the books editor, and that was one of her biggest pieces of advice for everybody, is speak your work. You will find what works and what doesn't very easily.
Yeah, that's a really great piece of advice, actually. Like, because when I said, like, I'm trying to change the voice, like essentially, like what I'm trying to do is take a lot of what was my doctoral thesis, and you're trying to like tone it down, which is sort of feels like a bit of a slap in the face, but it's not. It's just like there's a particular way of writing for academia which is not appropriate for anything else, right?
Right.
And so I did try one chapter. I tried to write in the way that I would speak, but it came out as a different character. It didn't come out as me, which is really interesting. Like, and I think it's in that transfer of into the fingers. It came out a lot more brutal than what it would normally be if I had just said it. Like, so I really like the idea.
I'm glad. You're welcome to use it. Absolutely. So it sounds like you and I could spend the next 6 hours chatting, but I know you have your own life to get back to. So I'm going to ask you, before we head to the bonus round in a minute, I'm going to ask you.
I'm so nervous about this bonus round.
It won't be that bad, I promise. So, but I have one question that I ask everybody who comes on the show, and it's a silly question, but I find that it can get some really profound answers. And the question is this: if you had an airplane that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Wait, say it again. If I hadn't,
If you had an airplane that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
wow, I'd probably just say listen.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love
But
that.
the weird thing about that is you've got this airplane telling you to listen.
But it's true though. I mean, think about it. Think about the notion. Your point is well taken. Listening is everything. It really is. It leaves you so much opportunity to imagine and to learn and to soak things up and to see things from new perspectives. How can anything be better than that? I love that.
Yeah, and it holds, like when I say listen, it's like there's layers, there's levels of listening, isn't it? So like just that challenge for your listener to really go, what is he talking about? Like in terms of really like deep listening, active
For sure.
listening, but listening with curiosity really is the key. Like
Absolutely.
listening with curiosity is it's such a wonderful thing to do too. You know what my favorite experience in the world is when I realized that I really don't know very much about anything at all. Like when I discover something new, especially like talk about my wife, when like, you know, we've been married for 21 years now. And when I discover something in her, which I'd never known before, like, you know, a trait or like whatever it is. And I go, oh, I might have got this wrong for 21 years. That's for me is such an overwhelmingly pleasurable experience because it's like that's emergence.
Absolutely. No, it's wonderful. My husband and I have been together 30 years this week actually. And yeah, thank you. And it's the same. I'm still learning from him every day and it's lovely. Yeah, and I think that notion of listening, what you were talking about. See, I could keep you here for 6 hours. What you were talking about with being a jazz musician, it's the same thing. It's the same curious listening to what is everybody else bringing to the table and how does that reflect in what I can bring to the table. And I'm a jazz musician too, and it's such a beautiful moment when you're in the pocket with the other
Isn't
people.
it?
It's just magic. It's magic.
You know, I've got these stories of like very long tours that I've done with bands where like there's one tour where we did 52 European cities in 51 days. So that's
Wow.
like intense. And you know, like when you tour like that, like life can get pretty loose, like pretty surreal because you're living in an alternative universe, essentially. Like essentially like it goes like sound check, stage, after stage, signing, you know, drinking, whatever, hotel, bus, do it again every
it all
single
again.
day.
Right.
And you actually lose context with where you are in the world. And quite often it'll be like, hey guys, are we in Italy? And it's like, no, mate, that was 3 weeks ago. We're in, you know, Germany or wherever you are. Like you're and all you've got is this little group, like, you know, 5 of you plus the tour manager plus the driver. That's it, right? And then you get on stage and you perform these songs over and over and over and over again. And then I can remember moments where where you walk on stage and you can be in front of, say, 5,000 people, but really it's just this tight unit and you've learned to listen to each other over this period so intensely that the slightest shift, like you're all making very slight shifts now in your musical, in what you're doing, like the way you improvise, or it's just really tiny shifts. And those tiny shifts are just having such an incredible impact that you're in this bubble of energy, of creativity on stage, and you've learned how to listen intensely to each other. And it's an incredible experience, which you know, if people could experience that in all facets of their lives, I guess that's what I've learned from music.
I love that. And I love what you say about tours and how you can, you know, there's a flow there, but there's also a sense of not being quite aware of where you are. What are your touchstones in that way? And before I let you go, I know, see, many things, because I would love it if people want to find out more about NRusk and also about you personally. I'd love to, I know people learn differently and all this stuff's going to be in the show notes, but would you mind just going through your socials? And also I'd like to talk a little bit about hotel corridors and what those mean to you.
I was wondering if you'd pick that up.
Well, you brought up touring, so I had to.
You are so funny. You're a great interviewer, by the way.
Thank you.
But so like the band, my company's website is enrusk.com. So it's fairly simple, nrusk.com. For socials, like my name's Kynan Robinson. There's only like 2 of us in the world. So like it's just if you just type in Kynan Robinson, it's pretty much like a lot of my work will be there, whether that be like personal, like the music stuff or the whatever it is. It's really easy to find. But like, please do reach out. Like, and the easiest way to reach out is like info@nrus.com. Like, I've done a few podcasts where people just go, hey, you know what? Like, what you're talking about, it's really, really fascinating. And I'd like to just talk about this part a little bit more. I'm very happy to get on calls and just talk to people as well and hear their opinions and stuff. So do reach out at info@nrus.com. Hotel corridors. Okay. Where this came from. So this is on my personal socials. So my personal Instagram, which will just be Kynan Robinson's Instagram. And I really need to set it up its own site, is like, when I was touring a lot, so going back over 20 years now, generally I found like what people would do, what musicians tend to do is they tend to take photos of themselves on stage, right? Because they're trying to connect back to the real world and say, this is what I do with my life, but they're somewhere in the world. And so they'll take a photo of themselves on stage. And what they're generally doing is showing off that, hey, I'm a cool musician and look how big the crowd is, right? That's really what's going on a lot of the time. And so I thought I'd go a completely different way with it, where I thought, like, you know what? The thing about touring is it is so repetitive, right? It is so repetitive. But in that repetition, there is always difference. So I thought I would start by just showing the people that I was the hotel corridor of wherever I was in the world, right? And from a hotel corridor, you can tell an awful lot. Like, you can actually tell a lot about the hotel. You can tell a lot about like the level of touring we're doing, depending on how nice or how horrible the hotel is. You can just tell an awful lot. And so I just started doing it. And it's also one of those things, like I really like art that kind of like repeats. So like I really like Rothko. Like Rothko is a sort of like a repetitive art form. Like, his art is essentially the same thing every time, but it has a lot of difference. And in doing that, like I must have taken now about like 10,000 hotel corridor photos.
Wow.
Which has, so it's sort of moved from its original intent to like just show people that I was on tour to like, there's something in what I'm trying to do. It's kind of hard to articulate actually, but it is also a way of connecting. Now, what happened from it is I have like people from all over the world who send me hotel corridor photos.
Wow.
Quite seriously, who like go, hey, Kynan, I was thinking of you, like, so it started off as friends, like they're in hotels. And so they're having some sort of experience themselves. And all they do is they don't send me their tourist shots or whatever. They just go, hey, Kynan, like normally they wouldn't have even connected with me, right? But they go, hey, Kynan, I was just thinking of you. And here's the shot of the hotel corridor I'm in. And so it opens a dialogue of some sort that might not have happened before. And then it's also opened up to like people all over the world who I don't know. Like it has its own sort of sub community going around it now, that of people who either send it in to me. Sometimes I put them up. I put up other people's hotels, but it's just a way of them connecting and wanting to talk, which is really fascinating.
I love it. And it's interesting. I've never thought of putting that as its own thing, but I do. I work in a lot of hotels, and I take pictures of sort of my green room, if there is one, where I got ready. I will often take pictures of that because it's always interesting. The preparation for before you go on stage it's a fascinating process. So I have a lot of appreciation for you doing that. That's fantastic. I am so grateful, Kynan, that you took the time to chat with me. And I know we're going to come back in a second and do the bonus round of questions. But before we do, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you're like, oh, I wish she'd asked this? Anything you want to close out with?
No, because I'm going to have you on our podcast and I'm going to ask all those questions of you then. Hey, I want to say thanks because, like, I think people like yourself do a really valuable service. Some of this stuff can be really contentious, and people when you talk in these ways, like, especially when we look at like discourse theory, like people can really rile up and go, "What a load of nonsense," and then can really attack. And so, the more that we can support each other in this way of thinking, I think is super important.
I couldn't agree more. And this is what pushes the boundaries. This is what lets us grow and stretch and get curious. And that's, prime directive for me if you're a Star Trek nerd. So
I am not.
No, anyway, so yeah, I mean, because curiosity to me is the driving force of so much, and allows us to really explore, and I think that that's awesome. Once again, this is Kynan Robinson, who has been so kind to come on the show and talk about some of these incredibly fascinating topics. I am Isolde Trachtenberg. I am your host. I hope that you enjoyed the show. If you did, do me a favor, let me know, drop a line, see if you have any questions. You can contact Kynan from all of the various places in the show notes. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg reminding you to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2021. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, remember to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind.